The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, April 10th, 2017. Thank you so much for joining us. It is always a pleasure to be able to speak with you about what's happening in the news and around the world. A lot of news happening today, and we'll jump right into it as soon as I get a chance to do what I always like to do at the top of the show, especially in light of how what's been coined YouTube apocalypse. At the top of every show, I like to thank all of our patrons, and especially the last 2 weeks, every one of you. Thank you so much for stepping up and helping the Benjamin Dixon Show and any other progressive show that you may have supported, because we need you now more than ever. YouTube has cracked down on the content that we can talk about, and so for us to be able to survive and to continue going, we actually need you to support us. And so with that, I want to thank Christopher S., A Bear 71, Sepher A. This is a tough one. AA side, I guess aside, sort of. Bart L. Bart A. Daniels S. Michael L. K. S. Chris H. and Adrian J. Thank you all so much for becoming patrons of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Again, we cannot do this without you, especially in light of everything that's happening with YouTube. That being said, let's jump into the news. Very sad news out of San Bernardino, California tonight. An 8-year-old student along with his teacher were killed this afternoon in an apparent murder-suicide. The name of the child has not been released. But the name of the victim, of the adult victim, Karen Elaine Smith, who was 53 years old. She was killed by her estranged husband, Cedric Anderson, who was also 53 years old. And you can see in the footage students being forced to evacuate to the local high school, where they were given all the things that they needed to wait until their parents were able to come and pick them up. But it's a very sad day, very tragic news. The superintendent of schools asked that they do everything that they could, talking to parents to get students back to normal as quickly as possible. This is the essence of what he was saying. And not to give him such a hard time, because, you know, he is probably as distraught as any other person in the administration. But I think that's part of the problem, is that we try to move too quickly. We move too quickly away from a tragedy. This is a very sad event. An 8-year-old who was standing behind his teacher. The man came in and he shot the teacher with a high caliber pistol, according to police officials. And the bullet also hit 2 children. There's a 9-year-old who's still in critical condition, but tragically the 8-year-old has died. And so we'll be keeping an eye on this. But I want to point out a few things here. As with any story of this magnitude, we do see the quick politicization of it. I didn't see it as much today, but I do want to point out a reality that was brought to my attention by my good friend, Michael Solomon, who also has a podcast with the Progressive Army and independent media, Media Revolt. But he pointed out something that's very true. This is not necessarily a story, a tragedy based on access to guns, so much as it is a tragedy of domestic violence and women who are killed by estranged husbands or boyfriends. And he began sharing some statistics on the number of women who are abused, domestic violence cases, the number of women who are murdered every year. And the story behind Cedric Anderson, who did this killing, it's still being revealed. But he shared a video on YouTube that I'm not sharing tonight, but we'll give you access to it. We'll get the link and share it to you. But he shared a video on Facebook rather, and he was talking about how much he loves his wife and how crazy essentially that she makes him. And it's really just points out that the gross tragedy that is domestic violence and murders of women, and how vulnerable women are to this type of violence. And when this violence is not, it's compounded by the fact that an 8-year-old child was a victim of this violence as well. And, for us to move so quickly past the crux of the story versus addressing the core of it, which is the amount of domestic violence that occurs in the United States every single day, every hour of every day, and how often that violence leads to murder. There's something that needs to be said about it. There's also something that needs to be done about it in a very significant way. And we can't move so quickly past this to politicize it and then ignore the reality that in the midst of our politicization, there is someone right now who is probably who is the victim of domestic violence. In international news, of course, everyone's eyes are locked on Donald Trump and Syria. Still, even though we reported on Thursday night as it was happening, or at least as it was reported to us, Donald Trump ordered a strike on the airport from which the alleged chemical attacks took place or were launched. He launched an attack and did not quite destroy the airbase. I did not pull his tweets, but it was interesting that Donald Trump began tweeting out almost a justification as to why the airstrike Tomahawk missiles, which are GPS accurate, like laser targeted accuracy. He began describing why this particular attack was not as effective. But not to get caught up on his drivel, because he's still full of drivel. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, he said that the U.S. airstrikes damaged or destroyed 20% of Syrian aircraft at that base. And he said that it would be ill-advised for Assad to ever again use chemical weapons. He said, this is General Mattis, according to the BBC World News, he said, quote, it was a measured response by the United States that resulted in the damage and destruction of fuel and ammunition sites, air defense capabilities, and 20% of Syria's operational aircraft. He added that the Syrian government has lost the ability to refuel or rearm aircraft at the airfield in which the attack took place. Use of the runway is of idle military interest. Now, it seems to be competing narratives as far as how effective the airstrike was. But there's also competing narratives as to what this airstrike actually means. And what does this mean in terms of Donald Trump's foreign policy? What does this mean in regards to our relationship with Russia? Of course, as we reported last week, actually, no, we did not get a chance to report this last week because it did not come out until after our broadcast. But Russia was notified. Russia was notified of the strike before the strike in order for Russian troops and military personnel to get away from the airport. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether or not that was an appropriate move. I'm not quite sure why there's any debate about that, to be honest with you, because this was out of everything that was potentially wrong with the attack, I think that was the smartest thing to come out of it. Because the last thing we need to do is to have a surprise attack on Assad that inadvertently gets us into a conflict with Russia. And so a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of mainstream media voices who are trying to spin the fact that President Trump and the Defense Department notified Russia in advance as some type of continuation of a conspiracy theory, when in fact it was the most responsible and mature thing to come out of all of this weekend's events, was to give Russia the notification necessary to keep us from getting into an armed conflict with Russia. So to that, I have absolutely no problem with it. The question is, what is Donald Trump's foreign policy? And what is Donald Trump's, or rather, what made Donald Trump change his mind with regard to Syria? Now, there's some speculations that it actually could be Ivanka Trump. Ivanka Trump began tweeting about how devastating it was to see the images of the babies, of the chemical attacks. And then it seemed like almost immediately after she began to vocalize, and this is just one of many theories, but it's worth mentioning because this is not the first time we've seen Ivanka Trump have an outsized influence on the president of the United States. And almost immediately after she began to voice her dissent, strikes were launched. Now, that's just one perspective. The other perspective is that it could quite possibly be the military industrial complex putting pressure on Donald Trump in the way that they would put pressure on any president. Why he did it, I'm not sure that we are ever going to know, at least anytime soon, why he would make a complete 180 from having a non-interventionist perspective to completely intervening. And not only intervening, but also giving a signal that he'd be willing to initiate a regime change war in order to get rid of Assad. Some speculate that actually may be in the works right now. Others say that, according to the language from Jim Mattis, that this is a warning. This was a warning, rather, and that if Assad continues, then they would go in and institute some type of regime change. I'm not sure that we can actually gather an actual foreign policy from Donald Trump on this, except for erratic, unpredictable, and unless there is some concrete piece of evidence that he's privy to, which is possible, but not in Donald Trump's style, unless there's some concrete piece of evidence that he's privy to that demonstrates that this was clearly Assad, no questions, then not only is his foreign policy, I don't want to call it feckless at this point, but it is absolutely unpredictable. But it's also highly influenced by people who probably should not be influencing the president on foreign policy, namely Ivanka Trump and anyone else in his circle. But again, these speculations, that's all we can do, is really speculate. Now, what we can do with certainty is take a look at the ramifications, the possibilities of conflict and furthering the conflict and getting the United States involved on a level that we, quite frankly, don't have the resources, energy, or political will to get involved. And somewhat the conversation of the hypocrisy over whether or not this is even about humanitarianism. I'm really one that does not believe that this has anything to do with humanitarianism, even if there's a side effect of humanitarianism. I don't believe this directly, particularly with Donald Trump, I don't believe it's directly connected to any type of humanitarianism, because if it was, you would not ban the same people that you're bombing. You couldn't. And I get it. You're right. So we're someone could argue that he's banning them. Yes, but he's also protecting them from getting attacked chemical. If you really want to be a humanitarian, then there are other ways of helping the people of Syria than bombing them. But again, I'm not sure that we can piece together any type of coherent foreign policy from Donald Trump other than it is erratic, other than it is unpredictable. Yeah, I'm really trying to chew on this and see if there's anything more that we can glean from it. I'm going to intentionally avoid the conversation on interventionism, this debate that's going on in progressive circles, whether or not we should intervene, whether or not we should stay away. I'm going to intentionally avoid that just a little bit longer because I want to have a robust conversation just on that topic, because there's a lot of nuances to be argued with it. There's a lot of grandstanding taking place. I will say this. The easiest thing, and I think I just opened up a can of worms. I should have stopped while I was ahead. The easiest thing for us to do is to grandstand when it's an issue of war and peace. The easiest thing to do is for us to look as though, or to try to give the impression that we are somehow morally superior, or however you want to describe it. But to me, the biggest responsibility that we have as progressives is not only to be anti-war, but also to present policies and positions, alternatives that are viable alternatives as foreign policy, so that we're not just shouting about about our outrage over interventionism and our outrage over war and conflict. Because if we're not giving a solid alternative, a viable alternative that can compete with the military industrial complex, I'm mighty afraid that all we're doing is grandstanding. And with that, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that for now. I'll leave it at that, because if I say anything more, then we'll be here arguing about it for at least the next 3 or 4 hours. All right, let me know what you think. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. What do you think about what's happening in Syria? There's a lot of other things that's happening in the news that we'll be covering, and we definitely want to know. We want to know your take. What's your take? All right. In other news, Alabama Governor Robert Bentley has been, he turned himself in and he was booked. He has also resigned. He's no longer the governor. He's resigned after the sex scandal really brought it to the front. He turned himself in for failing to file a major contribution report. He pled guilty to knowingly converting campaign contributions for personal use. And so instead of facing impeachment, he resigned and, of course, turned himself in on these 2 misdemeanor charges. He already pled guilty, and so it's not likely that he's going to spend any time in jail. But his political career is over, which really doesn't mean much for, he's 74 years old. And so he was at the end of his political career anyway. But this is all around sex. This is all involved with an inappropriate relationship that he had or allegedly had with his assistant, Rebecca Mason. And of course, he has denied it, but it became such a political disaster for him that he was going to face potential impeachment. And in the face of impeachment, he went ahead and resigned today. On Wednesday, according to the New York Times, on Wednesday, the Alabama Ethics Commission said that it had probable cause to find that Mr. Bentley committed felonies, and it asked the district attorney to consider prosecuting him. And so instead of facing felony charges, he appears to have pled guilty to misdemeanor charges. 2 days later, according to New York Times, a lawyer hired by the Alabama House of Representatives released a report that portrayed Mr. Bentley as deceitful and desperate. It was a 131-page report and offered little, and it stated that the governor offered little cooperation to legislative investigators. It also accused the governor's critics as being subjected to coercion, or actually he had coerced his critics, used the power of the governorship, power of his political power to actually to coerce anyone who was going to speak out against him. In June, the Speaker of the House was convicted in Alabama of ethics charges, and he was also forced to leave from office. And later on that year, Chief Justice R. Moore was suspended, violating ethics. If we go state by state, we're going to find a litany of these types of violations, these ethics violations. The violations in and of itself is nothing novel. But what is that someone is actually being held accountable, even if only a fraction of accountability versus him still remaining in office. So the Republican governor of Alabama has had to resign and turn himself in. And I believe we have an image of his mugshot showing that he's actually been arrested and smiling. It's not something that we get to see often, a mugshot of a sitting, of a governor, of a politician. But here is his mugshot, Bentley, Robert Julian Bentley, and his charges at the bottom. Again, it's a rare occasion that any politician is held accountable. But here you go. It happens. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, hey. Here's a story this story is almost unbelievable. It's so unbelievable that when I tweeted the video this morning, I actually felt bad because I had not thoroughly investigated. And I took some of my key sources at their word, and I was like, when I tweeted it out, I'm like, wait a minute. This story about United Airlines is so wild that maybe my sources are wrong. And so I doubled back as fast as I could to try to find out, is this exactly what happened. In case you're wondering, in case you're not, plugged in anywhere, United Airlines forcibly removed a paying customer from his seat. The video is shocking. The video is disgusting and disturbing. We're going to play the video. But the reason for which they removed him is equally as disturbing, because United Airlines, needed to get to get 4 of their employees to their destination. And so they forced 4 people off. Now, this has happened before. This happens. I'm sure many of you have stories of having to get another flight and they give you some type of voucher. But in this case, no one volunteered, or not enough people volunteered. And you'll see in the video how disturbing what happened next. Let's watch the footage.
Hey, come on.
Wow.
There you go.
Oh, this is,
Busted his lip.
Oh my God! Look at what you did to him! Oh my God!
All right. So United Airlines has admitted to overbooking, right? And not only did they overbook, but they had to remove people for their employees. Now, in most cases of overbooking, it's usually they catch you before you get on the plane. And in fact, their regulations state that they can not allow you. They can keep you from boarding the plane in the case of overbooking. But this is not someone who was being kept from boarding the plane. This was someone who was forcibly removed from the plane. Now, they made offers to people to deboard the plane so that they could accommodate their employees. They started at $400. Very few people, I think only one person may have accepted that. Then they went to the next offer, which was $800. No one else stepped up to receive or to accept the money in exchange for deboarding. They could have gone up to a maximum of $1,350, which would have got me out of my seat. I would have got right out of my seat and left, but they didn't. And no one is explaining why they did not go to the maximum offer. They stopped at $800. And then once no one acquiesced, or not enough people acquiesced at $800, they called security in. And you see what happens whenever you call the police. You do not. I mean, this story is ultimately about United Airlines, but we cannot leave out the fact that it was the Chicago police involved in this, and there was an air marshal, I believe, who was the one doing the physical manhandling of the individual. But this is what happens when you have police to come in to handle something that if they had gone up to the $1,350, I'm sure they could have found someone else to get off. But instead of doing that, they've made a fiasco, an international fiasco that's probably going to cost them into the millions of dollars, because under no circumstances is leaving a plane with a bloodied face a part of your agreement. Now, a lot of people are going to, not a lot of people, I think some extreme people are going to say he should have just gotten off the plane. In fact, we have video. We have video of the CEO, a former CEO of Continental, calling this man childish and calling him immature because he did not get off when he was told to get off the plane. Let's watch the first clip.
Had to be removed from the flight. I'm sorry. First of all, the men and women of United are truly professional, so this immature reaction obviously it disturbs us all, but there are millions of people every day on airplanes, and this involuntary denied boarding does occur, usually handled with a whole lot more maturity, I think.
A lot of people looking now through United's denied booking policy, which talks about denying boarding, doesn't say much about taking someone off of an aircraft. So is it your guess that once they got to 800 as a volunteer offer, didn't get any takers, they were stuck because they had already boarded too many people?
I think that may be true, Carl. They have, a list, so certainly your frequent flyer, your biggest earners, and of course the first class passengers, and the cost of your ticket has something to do with who gets involuntarily bumped off a flight. Of course it
does.
But there usually is space available, so that's not an issue. Obviously, this person was the most eligible.
All right, so there you go. So he started off saying, there's a couple key things out of this. So this is Gordon Bethune. He's a former CEO of Continental Airlines. Continental has merged with United, and I believe the company, the official name is United Continental. So Gordon Bethune is saying here, and actually it gets worse. There's another clip that we'll play in a second, but he's saying that this is ultimately the fault of the customer because he's being immature. Now, what he's not telling you is that this customer is a doctor who could not get home to take care of his patients the next day. It's not like he had to go, well, I'm not going to demean any other job, but it's not like he could just call in sick. He's a doctor. And so instead of them trying again, or even offering the highest amount, I'm sure somebody, instead of doing that, they forcibly removed him. And the former CEO of Continental has the nerve to call him childish or immature. It actually gets worse. Let's listen to the next clip.
And the man obviously didn't want to go. It's, like a child that didn't want to leave.
So, I mean, so add that on top of the fact that he is addressing your purchase of a ticket as almost as if they're doing you a favor, right? Almost like, and we talked about this pretty regularly on the show last year, but you're nothing more than a commodity to them. You're nothing more than a cog in their machine. And this is something that companies have to realize. This is a different day and age. You cannot simply just address people as though, or treat people as though you have no responsibility to the broader community. This video went viral within a few hours of it taking place. It would have gone viral sooner, but I guess they didn't upload them until they landed at their next destination. But this is the responsibility that corporations have to the general public. You are not out there free to just treat people the way you want to treat people, with just this disdain. And I actually want to pull up the quote from the CEO, I believe Oscar Munoz, where he really just started describing the situation in almost an unbelief. This is the statement, right? This is the statement from United Airlines, which shows me that they have very little regard whatsoever for the customer. And he said, "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at United. I apologize having to reaccommodate these customers. Our team is moving to make sense of urgency to work with the authorities to conduct our own detailed review of what happened. We are also reaching out to the passenger to talk directly to him, blah, 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 Oscar Munoz. See, I apologize for having to reaccommodate." What the hell clearly I know what reaccommodate. I know what he's trying to say, but this is not the time for you to. This is a PR fail. Can I talk about this from a marketing perspective, just from a public relations perspective? You do not dismiss what happened in a video that tens of millions of people have seen. You don't dismiss it as a reaccommodation. You call it for what it is. This man was accosted and assaulted. There's another video, right? There's another video of him standing there. I think I loaded it up. If I didn't, we'll have to do it afterwards. But you can see him standing there with his mouth full of blood. He's clearly in shock, and he's basically saying that they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. You do not, CEO of United, you do not address this as something that's a casual Friday afternoon press release. You address this with the same anger that the American people are feeling at this point. But United Airlines showed us with the entire Leggett incident of, I think, 2 weeks ago, that they have no clue whatsoever. They have no clue whatsoever how to do effective PR after they have offended. Let's forget about them having any clue about how not to offend their customers, right? Because clearly they've missed that mark. But they still don't have a clue on how you have a responsibility to the collective community of potential customers and active customers because of social media. But they're going to learn today. They are going to learn today. It's going to cost them dearly. And what's sad is that, who knows how many incidents it's going to take for them to actually learn their responsibility, but also the fact that you really don't have that many options in flying anymore, right? If you wanted to boycott United, you're going to have to boycott all of their subsidiaries. There's basically a monopoly that's taking place in airlines today. So even if you wanted to boycott United, you can't really boycott United as easily as you would if there was more competition in the industry. But because there's less competition in the industry, I guess they can have this disposition towards us and towards the customers because they know our choices are limited. And one last thing about this, and this is this dovetails perfectly into the conversation about monopoly. In the absence of a real free market competition, you get stuck with fewer options, and this is what happens. Because these companies feel so cavalier. They know that if you try to boycott them and you need to fly, you're going to end up flying with them anyway. That's number one. But number two is something that's pointed out by my friend Matt Brunig. You should know. Well, look him up. Anyway, he pointed out that they started off trying to use free market solutions to fix their problem. Basically saying, we need your seat. Here's something we'll pay you for your seat. And you see how quickly it escalated from being, we're going to use the free market. They didn't even go to the height, right? They didn't even go to 1350. They stopped at 800. But all right. But you see how quickly it escalated from using the free market solutions to full out assault, and how happily these officers facilitated that assault on behalf of corporations. I mean, these are your free market options at work. This is what happens. This is what happens when corporations can't use the free market to get what they want. They'll just run you over. And we see this time and time again, not only corporations, but the government. So the free market is good when it's in the benefit of the corporations. But as soon as it is no longer advantageous to corporations to participate in the free market, they will drag your ass off of a plane, kicking and shouting. Here's the footage that I wanted you to show. Take a look at this.
Just kill me. Just kill me. Kill me. Just kill me. How to go home? Kill me. Just kill me. Just kill me. Just kill me.
Let me know what you think. 857-600-0518. I don't have anything else to say about that. All right. Let's go to some international news. The French presidential elections have made a turn, I don't know, for the worse, because it was already pretty bad with Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen has essentially denies Paris's roundup of Jews during the Holocaust. And actually, let's just go straight to her quote. This is what she said. She said, France wasn't responsible for the Veldiv. If there was responsibility, it is with those who were in power at the time. It was not with France. France has been mistreated in people's minds for years. She went on to say, we taught our children that they have all the reasons in the world to criticize it, to only see its darkest historical aspects. I want them to be proud of being French. Okay, so let's talk about what she's doing here with her language. During World War II, France stood out above every other European nation and voluntarily rounded up thousands, nearly 13,000 Jewish citizens between July 16th and July 17th of 1942. And so for her to deny this and to say that essentially it's not the responsibility of France, but it's the responsibility, or it has to be laid at the feet of the administration of the time, is a complete erasure of the nation's responsibility to what it did. Her comment contradicts, according to the New York Times, it contradicts 20 years of state policy, which has been recognizing French responsibility for the roundup, all because she doesn't want to have to teach her children that that there's something bad about France, or that there's something bad in the history of France. Her campaign has been built on nationalism, this uber nationalism, this trend that we've seen spread across the nation, across the globe, quite actually. We've seen this trend with Donald Trump, with Brexit, with Nigel Farage, and now with Marine Le Pen. So she's running. This is a continuation. This is an extension of her worldview. This is also an extension of her father's worldview. Jean-Marie Le Pen, he actually called the Holocaust, quote, a detail in the history of the Second World War. I mean, essentially a footnote in the history of the Second World War. She said, this is Marine Le Pen speaking, and she said, we've taught our children that they all have reasons in the world to criticize France and to only see its darkest hours, and she wants them to be proud of being French. Last night, she tried to walk back her statement, but not really a walking back, more of a qualification. She said, quote, I consider that France and its republic were in London during the occupation and that the Vichy regime wasn't France. So she's trying to equivocate a little bit. She's trying to qualify this and essentially say that the reason she's not blaming France is because she doesn't believe that France was actually, this was an administration during a unique time in the history of France. Again, to this great article in the New York Times, historians disagree with her. The New York Times reports, quote, the Vichy government initially enjoyed wide support. Its functionaries and officials came largely from the pre-war bureaucracy, and many went on to have excellent careers in the government and business after the war. So for her to dismiss this and say, oh, this was not really France, well, they were there before the war. They were there during the war. And many of these same people that she says own the blame were successful after the war. Details, yes. Important details, yes. But more importantly is this idea that you that you cannot acknowledge the troubled past of your nation for you to have patriotism or love for your country. This is the problem. This is where Marine Le Pen intersects with so many different nationalist organizations and ideologies across the world, because they never want to admit that there's something wrong in the past of your nation. This is what blows me away. What blows me away is this idea that how can I put this? There's not a country in the world that has not committed some atrocity. Let's start there. There's not a country in the world that has not committed some atrocity. And if you have to erase your nation's atrocities in order for you to feel that pride, then you're not really proud of your country. The best example, of course, here is the United States. There are so many things that America has done historically that are a scourge, that are a red stain on America's past. And for us to erase that simply says that we're not mature enough to actually deal with the fact that we have a troubled past. No one, no nation, no individual, no ideology, no political party is born of some type of immaculate conception out of the purity of goodness and there's nothing wrong. No, if you need that aspect of your nation or your worldview, then you need to start over, because every single individual, every single ideology, every single political party, every nation has something in its past that should be shameful and should serve as a constant reminder of where you come from. But instead of doing that and having this reasoned, principled, mature look on who you really are, uber nationalists want you to completely erase the fact that they participated in war crimes, erase the fact that they participated in hate crimes, erase the fact that they participated in slavery, erase the fact that they marginalized women throughout history, erase the fact that they marginalized groups, minorities throughout history. And the reality of it is that it's never going to make your country any better. You want a whitewashed version of your country. You don't want people to be able to say that your country was screwed up. And I'm just wondering, like, who actually needs that? Who actually looks at themselves in the mirror and say, I've never made a mistake? This is what nationalism does to you. This is what nationalism does to you. It prevents you. It causes you some type of cognitive some type of pain for you to look at your nation and say that your nation actually has a very disturbed past and, quite frankly, probably has a very disturbed present. But instead of doing that, they would rather, people like Marine Le Pen, people like Donald Trump, people like Nigel Farage, people across this world who cannot come to terms with the fact that their nation, our nation, their ancestors, not mine, committed atrocities throughout American and international history, and we must never let them erase that from our books, no matter how hard they try. All right, this next video is unbelievable. And you had to know it came from, Florida. Let's listen in to this Florida sheriff. I guess this is their interpretation on an ISIS recruitment video. Let's listen in.
We are coming for you. If our agents can show the nexus between you, the pusher of poison, and the person that overdoses and dies, we will charge you with murder. We are coming for you. Run.
All right, this is Florida Sheriff Peyton C. Grinnell, Lake County, Florida sheriff. You know, they're not going to be able to see. Now that I realize that I'm sitting in front of it. We're going to put this on your main screen. At the end of the video, this is so hilarious. They spent so much time practicing how to look like ISIS. They forgot to spell check. If you pull it up, anonymous. So, you know, if you want to report a crime, you can submit an anonymous tip to Lake County. That I don't even know what to really say about this, except it reminds me so much of an ISIS video. Pull up that image of ISIS juxtaposed to the sheriff office, and you'll see, like, this is legitimately, you know, from an outsider from another planet, they would look at this and say, okay, these are two organizations of the same, you know, the same thing. It's hard to tell the difference. And listen, all seriousness, heroin is an increasing problem across the country. Just in some statistics from Lake County, according to New York Daily News, they've seen a tremendous spike in heroin deaths. According to the medical examiner's office there in Lake County, they had 7 heroin deaths in 2015. By 2016, it recorded 32 heroin deaths. Florida as a whole saw 752 deaths related to heroin, according to the Department of Law Enforcement. So heroin is a major problem. But, you know, when your war on drugs starts to resemble ISIS, you might want to really rethink your strategy. But also, more importantly than just the silliness of their video, is this that they're not going to address where the drugs are coming from. They're going to address the local drug dealer, right? This is what, if you watch the video in its entirety, they're addressing the local drug dealer, but they're not addressing how corporations and healthcare companies and prescription companies are making billions of dollars by flooding communities with opioids that inevitably lead. I mean, opioid addiction is a direct link to heroin use. And but this is how the drug on war on drugs has always worked, right? We're going to crack down in the most draconian fashion on the people on the local level, but never really address the source, never really address why and how it gets to the communities in the first place. So I understand, I get it. I get that there is a serious problem with heroin deaths across the country, but if they're really serious about addressing the epidemic, then they would address the opioids, the painkillers that are being flooded in every single community across the United States every single day. But instead of doing that and addressing it at a corporate level, they're going to, of course, crack down on the local level. Well, that's just how it goes. But be careful if you're in Lake County, Florida, because as you can see, there's some radical police officers who look like they will take the moderate police officers out back and behead them. ISIS has infiltrated the police department, the sheriff's department there in Florida. All right, one last story of the night. A bit of good news. I think it's good news. This is a picture, an image from a U-Haul that was rented in Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut. And I shared this over the weekend. There has been a transphobia bus, as you can see on your screen. Transphobia out of Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut. And in the front of it, there's this orange bus that is the transphobic bus. Basically, the bus says that there's only boy, there's only girl, that there is, and it's only biology. There is nothing else. And so they've been making, this transphobic bus has been making tours across the Northeast. They went to New York, they're in Connecticut. I'm kind of waiting, hoping that they would come to Boston so we could show them how we do it in Beantown. But anyway, someone rented out this U-Haul, and instead of, they didn't do any graffiti. We've seen it, the bus has been spray painted with graffiti, et cetera, et cetera. But they rented out a U-Haul and put up their own sign, and they followed this bus around through the entire city from border to border. And so the transphobic bus was not able to really make a stop without this bus being right there. And so they made a quick pass through Connecticut because they couldn't handle it. What's ironic is on the transphobic bus, there's the name of the organization, they have these innocuous names, of free speech. It's a free speech bus. But ironically, it was free speech that got them pushed out of Connecticut. So this is the good news out of Connecticut, and hopefully in New Haven, Connecticut. Hopefully they'll come up to Boston so we can show them how it's done. All right, let's take some callers. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Call again. I'm sorry, your call did not go.
Well, not sure what that was, but that's okay. Sound like we got the operator. All right. So let me know what you think. 857-600-0518. It's a conversation to let us know what you're thinking, or we could just, oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. No wonder. All right. While we wait on the calls, there is a story that I didn't print out. And no wonder I just went past it. All right, let me go over here. So over the weekend, I'm sure I know this from heart because I've been reading so much about it. So over the weekend, even after the strike in Syria, meeting with President Xi from China, in the midst of meeting with President Xi, Donald Trump, or the Department of Defense, announced that the U.S. was leading a carrier-led strike group towards the Korean Peninsula. This is according to the AP and many different outlets. U.S. Aircraft carrier-led strike group is headed to the Western Pacific Ocean near the Korean Peninsula, according to Admiral Harry Harris, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command. He directed the USS Carl Vinson strike group to sail north to the Western Pacific after departing Singapore on Saturday. This is, of course, seen as a provocation by North Korea. According to some scholars from the Rand Corporation, well, we'll call them scholars for now, from the Rand Corporation. I'm sorry, I don't know where that came from. So this strike group is essentially going to position itself so that it can intercept ballistic missiles tests. Now, just simply moving this strike group to the peninsula is a very provocative step. This is not brand new, right? We see whenever the United States conducts military exercises with South Korea, we move a strike group in a similar fashion. North Korea always states it as being a provocation. China as well also considers it a provocation. But in this case, this is not tied to any particular military exercise. Therefore, it is seen as an even greater provocation. That being said, adding this strike group there as a sort of a missile defense or as a way of spiting their ballistic missile capabilities. In essence, whenever North Korea tests a ballistic missile, it will be intercepted by the missile defense system from this strike group. This is a clear, a much greater provocation than we've seen in a very long time. But it is also consistent with U.S. policy to not allow North Korea to get an ICBM. Of course, our first policy was to not allow them to get a nuclear weapon. We couldn't stop that, but we are faced with some very difficult choices. How do we stop them from getting an ICBM that could potentially reach the United States, especially when it's a regime that is that has less connection with the international community than it's clearly isolated. An isolated regime with a nuclear weapon is not like something that we've dealt with in a very long time, if at all. And so for us to stop them from getting an ICBM that could reach the United States is clearly directly in line with what the Department of Defense and any administration, but definitely the Trump administration, is going to allow. During the Obama administration, we saw that we used cyber warfare to scuttle their missiles, their ICBM tests previously. We used cyber warfare to set back their nuclear program as long as we could. But now we're escalating this to not only utilize cyber warfare to undermine their ICBM capabilities. We're also using a carrier-led strike group to actually block their missiles. Now, this is an image that comes from the U.S. Navy Institute and shows you what the strike group consists of. It consists of the nuclear-powered, conventional-powered aircraft carrier. It consists of a replenishment ship. It consists of a series of destroyers, ships that are equipped to anti-aircraft capabilities, and it also consists of submarines. So this is a fleet that's prepared to carry out its mission, to be replenished, to take out any aircraft that attempts to attack it. I mean, this is, what do you say about the capabilities there? I'm more interested in where it goes from here. How does China look at this? Particularly China, right? Because China is the regional hegemon there. China is is the nation that clearly would have the capability of putting pressure back on the United States over and above any threat from North Korea. So it's very curious what kind of conversation did Donald Trump have with President Xi over the weekend? Was this discussed? Were any ramifications discussed? Nothing much really came out of President Trump's Mar-a-Lago visit with President Xi, but this was happening simultaneously. So it would be surprising if this did not come up in conversation. Last but not least about this, it really goes to the question of what are we going to do with a nuclear power? What are we going to do with a North Korean nuclear power that potentially has the capabilities of reaching the United States of America? This is a very interesting and important question, practically, but also let's just intellectually or academically. This is a question that I'm not going to try to answer tonight, but it's a question that I would also lay at the feet of progressives, because most of the perspective that I see from progressives across the country, the people who I talk to, quite a few leading voices in progressive circles, is one of not only non-interventionism, but respecting the sovereignty of another nation. But what happens with the sovereignty of that other nation potentially undermines our sovereignty or Japan's sovereignty. I'm just curious as how that plays out without making any judgment against anyone. I'm just curious, how does that play out? How does that play out in your mind? North Korea getting a nuclear weapon and the destabilizing force that would have for South Korea, as well as Japan, as well as other allies in the region, but as far as also for the United States of America. So I'd be curious. Leave your comments in the comment section. I'm sure it's going to be riveting. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and/or question? think we maybe have some audio problems here again. One more try. All right. So I think we're obviously having some audio problems on our end with the calls, but that's all right. Tomorrow night, be sure to join in. I want to know, give us some feedback in the comments section. Since we couldn't get your calls today, we will make sure to read your comments. Tweet me at Benjamin P. Dixon. Particularly 2 stories that I definitely want to talk to you about. I want to hear from you. What do you think about Syria and Donald Trump's foreign policy, if you can even call it foreign policy? I also want to know what you think about the North Korea, the strike carrier group, the carrier strike group that is going to North Korea, and more importantly than just the strike group that's going. I want to know, what do you think about the possibility of North Korea getting a nuclear weapon? Especially, I want to hear from you if you are a non-interventionist and you feel as though that the United States should not actively block North Korea. That's really the people I want to. If you feel that the United States should not actively block, and I know I'm saying it with a laugh, and I probably shouldn't, so it gives away what I really think. But anyway, you know me. But if you really believe that, I want to know, how do you rationalize that? I want to know your arguments. How does that play out for you? Because it's a fascinating position from my perspective. And also, what do I want to hear from you on? That's it. I mean, there's plenty of other stories, but that's all I've got for you tonight. Our phone lines weren't working, and I went to like 8 stories, so I'm not going to make up any more stories to talk to you about. Become a patron. Everybody who's watching, if you contribute $1, then we can fight back against what's happening on YouTube. So become a patron. We need you. I will see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.